So a very warm welcome to everyone to our Lunch and Learn session here at the PPMA. I still find that really difficult. I've said it so many times and it just doesn't trip off my tongue easily. It's great to have you here, and I'm delighted to welcome back. We've got Oracle joining us again. They've done a number of sessions for us throughout the period of lockdown. And today, our colleagues from Oracle are joined by Mel Newton, partner with KPMG, and it's fantastic that Mel and Kerry have given their time to join us today. Any questions that you've got, please pop them into the chat facility and we can pick those up as we go along. Otherwise, we've got half an hour together, and I'm going to not to waste any further time, but once again to say thank you everyone for joining us. And I'm going to hand over to Mel, who's going to start off this session for us. So Mel, thanks again, and over to you.
You're very welcome. Pleasure to be here. So my name's Mel Newton. I'm a partner in our KPMG consulting team. I lead on people consulting, and one of the key elements I look at is workforce transformation. So Kerry and I put together some slides here to talk about the permanent changes we're seeing around workforce and workplace in a post-COVID world, and the things that people managers are really concentrating on cross-industry, really. Kerry, do you want to just introduce yourself before we scoot on?
Before we scoot on, that's lovely. Yes, so Kerry Nutley, I'm sure you probably may have seen me at previous PPMA events. I'm the Strategy Director here at Oracle, looking after our human capital management. Thank you. Mel.
Okay. All right, so let's go into the way we're thinking about the response to COVID, and most organisations have got a version of this, whether it's tranche 0, 1 and 2 or the 4 R's which we've developed, really looking at the 4 periods of response to COVID. The first one being reaction. That was the first sort of 2 or 3 months when we were all on our adrenaline-filled panic behavior, getting people up and running and working from home, and really keeping the lights on for everybody at work. The second part of that is resilience. So this was a recognition that this was going to last a little bit longer than that initial 2 or 3 months, and that people were going to be needing to still deliver on the work that they need to do, that consumers' demand would still be a bit slow in coming back, but nevertheless we had to put procedures and processes in place to support that for a slightly longer term. We're now really moving to think about recovery in reality. So recovery is the element of how do we get back to where we might have been before. So trying to build that more positive climate in terms of recovering in the marketplace. But most organizations are now turning their heads to the opportunities that a new reality, in quotes, provides to everybody. So this is a recognition that actually a lot of the trends that were coming through what was known as Industrial Revolution 4.0, i.e. more flexible working, greater use of data, more virtual activities, more generations in the workplace, so millennials and Gen Z working with people who are moving into their 60s, having different requirements of the workplace. That there are opportunities now that COVID has accelerated for everybody, and how we're going to engage and embrace those going forwards into the next 6, 12, 18 months. Okay. We kind of like to have frameworks. As all good consultants, we like to have a framework to hang our thinking around, and this is no different. So we've popped our thinking around workforce transformation into a framework that covers strategy shaping, sourcing, employee experience, capability building, planning, and analytics. Just to touch on those, people strategy is looking forward to how an organization is thinking about engaging with the people that it needs to do the work. So that might be a fluid workforce across full-time people, part-time, contractors, third-party service providers, consultancies, etc. So it's thinking about what's the strategy for that. And then underpinning that are shaping. What will the structure look like? What are the skills that we need to do the work? So a move towards skill-based design rather than role-based design makes a much more fluid workforce, and the ability then to look out at a much wider talent pool as we look at those skills. The second part is sourcing, looking at all of the different options for sourcing. So no longer thinking about an individual in a particular role, following a career path, working a standard 40-hour week, but actually thinking much more about how do we get the skills into the organization to deliver the work that we've identified through the shaping process. Employee experience taken in its widest sense. So this is not only the processes and procedures that an employee experiences, but also the EVP that they're offered, the leadership and culture and behaviors that we see in an organization. So from a very widest point of view, what is the experience that would make an employee either wish to join the organization or to remain working with an organization? What's the contracting between employer and employee? Workforce capability and agility, that's really talking about needing to develop a workforce planning and workforce management function within your organization. It typically hasn't existed within the HR function, and probably requires input not only from HR, but also strategy, COO functions, even the CIO, in terms of looking at what the workforce strategy needs to be. Finally, workforce planning and monitoring is probably the most familiar one to most of you in terms of understanding what you're going to do with your people, what numbers need to be in place, where they need to be, and the underlying analytics to support that. So it just provides you with a sort of a brief framework for thinking about workforce. Thanks, Kerry. What we do know coming out of COVID is that the workplace and how we do work is fundamentally changing. So looking at the pictures at the bottom of that screen for a second, what we've done is, instead of thinking about individual personae, we've thought about it in terms of the type of work that needs to be done. The first part of that is operational work that requires a specific workplace, machinery, security potentially, but it requires a particular environment for somebody to be able to do their work, and they cannot do that from a home or a virtual standpoint. The second point is, so that also covers the secure work in terms of things like traders or people that are having particularly secure conversations and can't be open to others hearing that. In the middle, you've got collaborative work, so that's project-based work, team building, might be planning exercises. A lot of that is probably better face-to-face, whilst there are lots of great tools to support it. And then on the right, we've got communicative work and knowledge work, which really can be delivered from a virtual basis. And whilst we recognise that we can put people into these buckets, there are also some individuals that will be special cases outside of this and require special attention in terms of well-being and safety, and may need to have a workspace provided to them outside of the office.
And I think on that point, that's definitely something that we saw here in Oracle. So when COVID-19 kind of kicked in and everybody was asked to work remotely where that was possible, we had a lot of customers that not only wanted to track kind of the government and health policy, but I think as an HR practitioners, we also understood that some of our colleagues and the people that we support have needs that weren't necessarily obvious. So I think it really did bring to the forefront things like mental disabilities and illness that people hadn't declared. And so therefore we found a lot of customers speaking to us regarding how do we collate this data, what's the legislation, what's our kind of response that we need to do in terms of an employer. And although Oracle aren't obviously within that legal compliance situation, what we did do is we looked at how products like Oracle's HCM Cloud could go out and offer things like pulse surveys to collate this data that we wouldn't normally ask for, or may have if people want to offer that up voluntarily, to collate that very sensitive data, as well as helping some of our HR colleagues in terms of how you might coach on the response to that into line management to make sure that we were dealing not only with the data elements, but the sensitivity of those conversations as well. And if you didn't manage to tune in, there's some great help on these topics that we provided via our HR Talk Time that's available for download as well. Thanks, Mel.
Super. I guess that the other part of this then is actually thinking about what does the office of the future look like and how do we access to that. And what we're seeing is that there is really a desire from organizations to make this a more permanent change. So looking at, for example, financial services, typically we have large office space based in a city environment or potentially a large business park, Canary Wharf, Brindle Place in Birmingham, areas of Manchester, Edinburgh, etc. And organisations have been working around regular 9 to 5 attendance in the office, typically desk-based. Very much the team is my team and they're sitting in front of me and I can see them there. A bit of an approach to, if you're not here on a Friday, that's actually, you're not working from home, you're taking a nice easy day. So there was a kind of lack of trust in terms of the way that people were working. And what we're seeing is definitely an embracing of the model on the right, which is much more a focus on the majority of work being conducted remotely. I talked to the HR MD of a large organization last week, and they're only expecting around 6%, that's 6% occupancy of their physically provided workspace going forwards. So this really raises the question of do we require those single big headquarter offices around in 1 or 2 places in the UK versus a smattering of workplaces dotted across the UK, providing much better access to the UK-wide talent pool, and therefore providing us additional opportunities to renegotiate contracts, salaries, London waiting, and all of those sorts of elements. Kerry.
And I think that's really interesting, because I think, you know, you probably had citizens within your local government area that potentially may commute to a large city, or you may be supporting those large cities. So I guess what's this going to mean? So we are hearing from customers that potentially they might take out more space in kind of a WeWorks, or, you know, take out lots of these little modular places so people don't have to travel so much into large metropolitan areas. And I guess just having a think about it, not only what does that mean for the people that you support within local government, but is there going to be a potential increase of service as people stay more local in terms of their workplace rather than travelling further distances? So I think that's going to be quite an interesting thing to look at in terms of the market. The other thing that we looked at in Oracle was how could we look at things like machine to machine. We know that returning to a shared workspace, and I know some of you guys are already back at the office and maybe never left, being seen as one of those critical workers to help and support. But we know that it's not only about the kind of process of how do you get people in, how do you check the health and safety of those people and whether they are at risk of carrying COVID-19, but there's also the kind of mental state, the anxiety, potential fear that some people might have about returning back to a shared workspace. This was something that we were asked to do for one of our customers in the Gulf region, and this is where we were able to connect our human capital management platform, so the platform that creates HR tickets where people might raise a query into HR, and connect that to what we call a beacon. A beacon is a set of kit that sits in a reception of a building. In this particular example, it linked into facial recognition and a thermal imaging camera, which was able to provide that particular company, as employees walked into the building, it would check from that thermal imaging camera whether they had a high temperature. If they had a high temperature, the barriers that they walked through or they they would get sent a mobile text saying, you know, probably a bit too hot, please can you speak to HR before entering the building, and those people that had a temperature that was set within government and health policy guidelines could enter freely. And I think that only gives some kind of responsibilities to the employers. So like local government yourself, you probably have lots of buildings which obviously people are in and out of, but it does help when we have these preventative measures in place to really help people in terms of their fear and anxiety, that obviously organisations are looking to do the best they can to try and obviously keep managing and monitoring of some of the situations as we move back to work. And the great thing about this, just as you can see from the dashboard, is that, say, for example, there was a case, the platform was able to tell the HR department where those were. So if we think of where we are in the UK, that could obviously flag if people were in particularly in Leicester versus elsewhere, as we go through this cycle of managing and mitigating some of the health implications around it. So we know we're going to be continually changing, and how we monitor that is obviously something that the HCM platforms that we have can help and support with.
Yeah, okay. And I guess building on that is there's the immediate support for health and safety and ensuring that people are safe wherever they are working. There are also the other support elements to people working in a combination of virtual and physical environment. So how do you make sure that you keep people up to date with what's going on, ensure that they feel engaged with the organization? How do you adjust the way that you lead teams in this kind of joint virtual physical environment we're in? How would culture and behaviors change? How do we share the values of the organization with people who are predominantly working in a virtual environment? That becomes a much more of a challenge. And then obviously thinking about from the environment point of view, how do we ensure teams are working effectively, kind of independent of any element of their location? So there's all sorts of things that we need to think about from an HR point of view around engagement, leadership, culture, and the kind of behavioural environment that we're seeing ourselves in. So really just to kind of reiterate that the framework, all of the things we've talked about in terms of environment, culture, roles and responsibilities, leadership and so on, all fit into an element of this framework. And I think you might want to use it as a way of framing what are the things that you need to consider in terms of your workforce going forwards into this new reality. What are the opportunities that are now presented by this acceleration of workforce trends that would help you to attract and retain the best talent that you need for the work that you need done? And where are there opportunities for potentially improving quality and also reducing the cost of that workforce?
And I think kind of concluding a little bit from ourselves here, I think what we're seeing from customers is that it's the interconnectivity of the HR function. So it may start with a kind of workforce management, attendance, time and labour piece. So is somebody in today? What critical activities do we need to cover if they're not coming in? What does that mean in terms of how long they might be out, and what's the kind of situation we need to support, which then kind of filters through to, do we have enough people already trained that we could then provide that contingency cover? It's the continual changing of the scenario planning, because what we know with this situation that we're currently in is that nothing is certain. And what we also know, speaking to our HR customers, is that normally when you have kind of some form of business resilience or continuity management piece, that it's a kind of set period. It might be a building fire, a flood, strike action, but there's some kind of view of what might be happening there. I think kind of situation with this is that we don't know the endpoint, and therefore what we're also aware, speaking to our customers, is that we have to consider HR and their needs and the amount of kind of replanning and business resilience, continuity management that is now going to become our new normal within HR. So as HR individuals, having, you know, been them ourselves, and Mel as well, we probably are, as I've always said, our cobbler's children, whereby you know, we support the businesses and our local authorities and our fellow colleagues first before we think about ourselves. And I think with this one, what we're seeing is customers saying, we can't continue to constantly do this heavy lifting, this replanning and reshaping, because it is that interconnectivity between things like workforce management, skills and capabilities, policy, training, to name but a few. And that's where we're seeing services like human capital management platforms, obviously for which Oracle is one, is really able to go in there and to do the heavy lifting. And for us, that's super important, because we as individuals, we as HR, we can't keep running at this, and we know the duration of this is unknown. And therefore, I think it's really important that we think about what is it that we truly need in terms of our support mechanisms, both in terms of both process, technology, but also a mental well-being perspective that we need to have in place to look after ourselves. And one of the talk times we had was with Suki Bassi, and she always talks about, you know, if you're on an aircraft, the advice is put your oxygen mask on before you support others. And I think, you know, for HR, we must do that. We must put our oxygen mask on first, and then think about how we can then truly optimize and support our local authorities that we do in such a great way every day. But we've got to understand that we can't do this forever on things like spreadsheets and PowerPoints, and because the duration is unknown and there's a lot of interconnectivity to get this right that we seriously need to think about. And that's, I think, it from Mel and I.
Yeah, I encourage you to, if you're interested in more of this, kpmg.co.uk. We've got links to lots of COVID materials and enterprise resilience. So please feel free to access there and contact me if you would like to know anything further.
Great, and I've put my contact details here, and Nicola is sitting probably on mute going, Kerry, what happened to the other photos? I'm sorry, Nicola, there were some other people, but I think people from the PPMA know the lovely Aaron Cross, they know me, so please get in contact. And I have obviously flashed up some of the links to some of the replays on some of the topics we've discussed, so there you go.
Thank you so much, Mel and Kerry. And we will put all of those details up on the website for anybody who wants to make contact. And I thought that, I mean, it was an absolutely fantastic distillation of really complex thinking, very simply put, very powerfully put. And those models that you've shared, Mel, are really helpful for people to kind of get their thinking into a different space. I wonder, just whilst we've got a few minutes left before we need to close, if you've got any advice or tips that you could give in terms of HR colleagues who, of course, have been spending a huge amount of time firefighting, you know, helping organizations respond very tactically and practically to the challenge of lockdown and what that means for its local communities. And here we're now going to have to shift very quickly into kind of that strategic thinking and, you know, looking after the HR community itself. How and what should we be doing to prep ourselves to be able to go back into the business and start having the right kind of conversations? What are the key things that we need to have in our heads, do you think? So
I'll give a very brief answer. My view is you need to not shirk away of thinking longer term planning. So absolutely continue to react and make decisions that you have to now, but also think about the longer term opportunities this provides as a catalyst for change of things you might have been wanting to introduce for a while, and you know, seize that opportunity right now. Kerry?
I think you're right, and what my point of view is, probably Mel's obviously a partner for KPMG for a reason, because she's very strategic. I was actually thinking skills capability, but on the same remit. And I think for me it's about having understanding of the macro data to help the medium term. So when I think about skills and capabilities, and Mel talked about it at the beginning, it was, you know, we know that people will potentially become sick until we can find a kind of vaccine for the current situation. So therefore it's trying to sweep like a curling game so that you have the information up front, so when you need it you can put your hands on it. So where we're looking at critical frontline workers, whether that's social services, whether that's refuge, or whatever you have classified, it's looking back into the organisation to say, and where can we find these people from should we not be able to provide critical cover. And I think the fact is that we know that we might be able to do that immediately, but how can we do that more in the midterm? What are we doing to try and build that business resilience in, by trying to either have just-in-time digital training, have people through the necessary qualifications. So should we have that potential risk, that we're trying to mitigate it in advance. And I think, as Mel says, it's really about having that medium to long-term view to say it's the what if, but also what's the good. So through remote working, people have had, you know, maybe a different work-life balance. For some that might be better, some people might be wearing multiple hats in terms of being parent, teacher, etc. So was there anything that's come out of it that actually want to put back into the organisation as well, which has been of use, that actually maybe an increase in volunteering, and the good things as well that you want to keep as part of the culture moving forward?
Fantastic, and thank you both so much. A few questions that have popped in around the slides. We will have the slides available as part of the presentation on PPMA website, and so hopefully you'll have an opportunity to really digest the information that's being packed into there. So once again, on behalf of PPMA, huge thanks, Kerry and Mel. Also I see Aaron's on the line, Aaron Cross from Oracle. Big supporters and you know, great partners to have with PPMA. And we look forward to welcoming you back to a future program. And all of you out there, in terms of whatever you're up to, thanks for everything that you're doing on behalf of the HR profession. It's great stuff, and we're really thankful and appreciative of the work that you're doing. And we send you lots of love and friendship, and look forward to seeing you hopefully back on Friday, when we'll be joined by Penna, looking at further issues around kind of recruitment and the implication that's having during lockdown and beyond. So we look forward to welcoming you back to a future program. And in the meantime, stay safe and well. And thanks everybody for joining us today. Bye for now.
Thanks, Ethan. Bye.
Bye-bye.